I don't care if they eat their own young. We're deploying the humans." No one laughed. Not in the command chamber of the Silithar High Council, where centuries of diplomacy, containment, and pacification had held the galaxy in a carefully managed equilibrium. But equilibrium meant nothing now. The Vardrasi were coming, faster than predicted, smarter than expected, crueler than any simulation had dared model. And we were losing. The counselors hissed, clicked, and radiated waves of disbelief. One of them, a six-limbed strategist named Caltrin, flared his mantle in protest. "Unleashing the humans is not an act of strategy, it's desperation." "Yes," said Admiral Trivak, calmly adjusting his neural implants. "Exactly." They stared at him as if he'd spoken treason. Perhaps he had, but treason mattered less than extinction. The Vardrasi had torn through the Asen fields in 4 days. They reduced the moon bastions of Trikar to molten slag in hours. Their ships didn't just destroy, whatever wasn't vaporized was taken. Soldiers, civilians, entire biospheres, gone. The Alliance had thrown its best fleets forward. Hundreds of species, centuries of technology, all of it gone. That was when Admiral Trivak, quiet, patient Trivak, said the one thing everyone had thought, but no one dared voice aloud. "Open the vault on Terra Black. Wake the primaries." There had been silence then, like someone had torn sound itself from the air. The humans, real humans, weren't part of the Alliance anymore. Not after the Red Spiral uprising, not after the Quran incident, not after everything they'd done to themselves, to others. The ones who remained in civilized space were the domesticated versions, the diluted ones, diplomats, scientists, soft voices and clipped words. Safe, but Terra Black held the old stock, the kind the Alliance sealed away after the Omega Wars, the kind bred for attrition, for chaos, for war without restraint. We hadn't seen them in 100 years. Not really, until now. 6 days after the vault opened, the first human emerged into combat. He wasn't large, not compared to a Silithar. No obvious augmentations, no shimmering shields. Just a man named Sergeant Kyle Rourke, dressed in gray armor and carrying a cannon that seemed far too small to do anything serious. He was deployed alone to the siege of Ulkarak, where 700 Vardrasi warriors had broken through the last planetary defenses and were carving their way toward the spire. Kyle killed them all. It took 19 minutes. We didn't believe it at first. Command suspected a systems error, sensor glitch, propaganda leak. But the thermal feeds confirmed the biomass vaporization. The audio logs played back his breathing, his voice as he spoke calmly through it all, as if it were a routine patrol. When we asked him later what his strategy had been, he said, "Flank, suppress, breach, clear. Standard drill." They sent in another, then a unit of 6, then a battalion. By the end of the second week, they'd pushed the Vardrasi out of the Karan Belt entirely, a task that had cost the Alliance 9 full battle groups and a dozen colonies. The humans did it in 62 hours and left a message behind on the last asteroid stronghold, scrawled into the metal with something they called a combat knife. "We're back." You couldn't predict them. That was the worst part. Our species operated by patterns, by logic trees. We calculated threats, analyzed energy signatures, tracked probability ranges. Humans, they improvised. They failed tests but won wars. They didn't just charge into hopeless odds. They made you believe the odds had been hopeless only because they hadn't tried yet. One Vardrasi warlord attempted to negotiate a ceasefire. They met the human commander, a quiet man named Hawthorne, on neutral ground. The warlord offered safe retreat, surrender terms, even genetic preservation. Hawthorne responded by opening his briefcase, removing a sandwich, and eating it without saying a word. The ceasefire attempt ended when the Vardrasi ship exploded mid-orbit. Surveillance drones caught Hawthorne leaving the blast radius with soot on his face and a small smile. No one knew how he did it. We stopped asking after a while. Our problem was that we'd mistaken the absence of humans in war for peace. It wasn't peace, it was containment. By the 3rd month, we weren't worried about the Vardrasi anymore. We were worried about what came next, because humans didn't stop at repelling threats. They pursued them, hunted them, ended them, and every dead Vardrasi ship was another marker in their trail, another red flare in the void. "They're not killing out of hate," said one Oran philosopher. "They're killing because we gave them permission." By the fourth month, Vardrasi fleets began self-destructing before engagements. Their captains uploaded confessions, pleas, warnings to their kin. "Do not let them find you," one transmission said. "Do not let them follow you home." We tried to coordinate the humans. To structure their advance, they ignored us. Not maliciously, they just didn't seem to notice. It was like trying to tell a hurricane which direction to blow. I visited one of their staging ships, Designation Harbinger. Inside, the walls were scrawled with diagrams, maps, notes, theories, graffiti. It looked chaotic, primitive, but somehow it worked. The humans joked with each other, sparred in hallways, argued over rations, and who was better at something called sniping with iron sights. Their commander, a former Spec Ops man named Torres, offered me a drink when I boarded. I declined. He shrugged and drank his anyway. "You think this is all crazy," he said, "but we're not doing anything new. We just remember what the rest of you forgot." "What's that?" I asked. He leaned forward, his face illuminated by the red glow of a holographic battle grid. "Hope isn't given. It's taken back." Later, I watched him board an assault drop pod. No shield harmonics, no stealth field. Just 30 tons of metal, boosters, and men yelling down a comms line, riding fire into the atmosphere of a Vardrasi world. They didn't hesitate, not once. The war changed. The alliance went from losing to surviving, then from surviving to winning. Not because of better technology, not even because of better tactics, but because of one species that had been locked away for being too dangerous, too wild, too unpredictable. When they asked Admiral Trivak if he regretted opening the vault, he said nothing for a long time. Then he answered, "No. But I sleep less." Because humans didn't come out of the vault the same as they went in. They came out hungry. And the galaxy, for the first time in eons, felt the cold breath of something it hadn't known in 1,000 years. Predation. The humans didn't just win battles. They made them unrecognizable. Standard war theory said that every conflict followed stages: reconnaissance, engagement, attrition, retreat, or dominance. But when humans entered a war zone, those stages collapsed into each other like a broken waveform. Entire campaigns blinked out of sequence. A system would report an incoming Vardrasi fleet at 0800. By 0810, the same fleet was broadcasting distress signals. By 0815, nothing was left but static and human comms, laughter bleeding into unsecured channels. "We found their main fleet hub," came one such broadcast, requesting permission to do something stupid. The request was denied. They did it anyway. The Vardrasi called the place Zarthan Prime, a fortified moon city orbiting a gas giant, with kinetic shields strong enough to repel planetoid collisions and hangars housing swarm legions. Our models predicted a 6-month siege, with losses projected in the high millions. The humans dropped in less than 1,000 operatives. That was all they asked for. Not a fleet, not even orbital support, just atmospheric breach pods, specialized gear, and what they referred to as an unhealthy amount of high-velocity nonsense. The mission log was scrambled, partially corrupted from whatever tech they'd been using. What we did recover made no sense. Timestamps failed to align with planetary rotation. Gravity fluctuated where it shouldn't have. One camera feed showed 2 humans arguing mid-battle about whether a crate of explosives counted as cover if you believed hard enough. The feed cut off just after one of them used said crate as a springboard to jump onto a Walker unit's head. 17 hours later, Zarthan Prime was gone. Not captured, not destroyed in a clean, explainable way. Just gone. The moon's mass was still there, but reorganized into an unstable debris field. The Vardrasi command structure disintegrated overnight. 2 fleet commanders defected without terms. One simply transmitted a single word: enough. By then, Alliance morale had shifted. Not out of courage, out of confusion. Our tactics stopped mattering. Our simulations stopped predicting. Entire command councils began submitting operations to human review teams, most of whom barely followed protocol. One team submitted their battle plan in the form of a handwritten list titled Step 1, Surprise, Step 2, See Step 1. It somehow worked. In an off-record session, Admiral Trivak confessed to the Ralvathan Observer, "They aren't solving our war, they're rewriting what war is." There were downsides, of course. Not all humans came back from the vault clean. Some had adapted too well to the long silence. The kind of men who saw strategy as a form of art, and art as something meant to horrify. These were the ones who didn't speak unless necessary, whose ships docked without lights, whose armor never matched. There were rumors of an unofficial human division, codenamed the Null Hand. No records, no call signs. Just areas where Vardrasi colonies turned silent. Not destroyed, not conquered, just silent. The few recon drones that returned showed nothing but burned-out cities and messages carved into stone or metal. One message read, "Stop sending us invitations to peace." But even they were disciplined in their own way. None disobeyed global objectives. None turned on the Alliance, just operated like they knew what came next and wanted to meet it ahead of schedule. We tried to adapt. We upgraded algorithms to track their movements. We mimicked their chaotic structures with our own. The results were mixed. At one point, the Sidrathi Council proposed a joint unit. Integration, they said. Fusion of methodology. They paired 4 of their best with a human fire team on Vornak 7. It lasted 6 minutes. The Sidrathi, armored in reactive gold plating and armed with fusion spear tech, initiated a traditional approach pattern. Line formation, cover to cover. The humans were already airborne by then, using the fire from enemy turrets as launch markers, bounding across the terrain like sparks over dry wood. One landed atop an artillery dome and used a salvage pipe to reroute a missile into its own hangar. Another screamed something about distraction level max and vanished into a fog bank with a flamethrower. The Sidrathi team leader radioed for extraction 30 seconds later. "Status?" Command asked. His reply was faint, shaken. "They do not require assistance. They require warning labels." But the Vardrasi didn't retreat. That's the part we didn't understand. They had ships left, worlds left. Whatever madness the humans brought, it was working. But the Vardrasi stayed, until Argo Theta. Argo Theta wasn't strategic, it wasn't populous. Just a cold gas giant with a scattering of mining colonies. But something had been buried beneath its surface for thousands of years. A structure, an intelligence. We thought it was a myth. Until the Vardrasi lit a flare from its orbit and began transmitting in a frequency we hadn't heard in 2 galactic cycles. Binary distress markers, emergency yield codes, planetary fallback symbols, and in the center of their signal, coordinates for a meeting. The humans arrived before anyone else. We dispatched 2 envoys to observe. They returned 3 days later, one silent, one muttering about the eyes under the ice. The logs from the human expedition were mostly redacted. All we know is that after Argo Theta, the Vardrasi surrendered their homeworld's location. No conditions, no negotiations, just a set of coordinates. The Alliance prepared for the final offensive, but the humans didn't wait. They launched something called Operation Triage Dust. Hundreds of small shielded drop capsules. Not warships, not bombardment, just men, alone or in pairs, sent to infiltrate, sabotage, or vanish into the Vardrasi atmosphere like ghosts. We asked Commander Hawthorne if he needed fleet cover. He declined. "I need space," as he said, "to work." The fleet followed anyway, slower but eager, hungry, not to fight, but to see. The legends were already growing, faster than comms could verify them. Stories of human fighters who whistled tunes in the dark as they crept through hull vents. Of a man named Graves who walked 20 kilometers through toxic air, dragging a dead Vardrasi war beast by its tail. Of others who hacked Vardrasi networks using pre-collapse human slang to short-circuit translation AI. The humans had become the war's gravity. Everything bent around them now, even silence. At the edge of the Vardrasi homeworld, our fleet stopped. Not because of enemy fire, not because of fear, because of what we saw. The human drop team had already carved their mark into the upper stratosphere. Not with weapons, not with satellites, but with burn trails from coordinated capsule entries, streaking across the clouds in exact patterns, like ancient symbols. One such symbol translated roughly as, "Judgment is not a matter of choice, it is a consequence." No transmissions, no declarations, just precision, velocity, and the quiet pressure of inevitability. And still, they hadn't deployed their largest assets, because humans had warships, real ones, the kind still sealed in orbital bays hidden during the old wars. Ships with names like Regret Engine, Kingmaker's Grin, and What Remains. Most were still docked, still waiting. Because so far the humans hadn't needed them. They were still using their light teams. I once asked one of them, Corporal Resnick, I think, why they held those ships back. He laughed, pulled a toothpick from his mouth, and said, "You don't send a tidal wave to handle a puddle. That's just rude." We didn't laugh. We just watched as humanity walked through fire, into the very heart of their enemy's empire. And the fire didn't consume them. It followed. It began with silence. No resistance, no warning, no fleet standing guard over the Vardrasi homeworld. Just a dead orbit, an ancient planet cloaked in green-gray clouds, and the long, descending trails of human fire teams dropping like comets toward its surface. They landed without ceremony. Most worlds made noise when invaded. Sirens, interceptors, hails or screaming. But this one, Varknol, offered none of it. It was like the Vardrasi had folded their hands and stepped away from the table. The humans didn't pause. They deployed across the planet like roots seeking purchase. Each squad had different objectives: demolition, disruption, retrieval, psychological pressure. Within hours, entire cities were cut off from power, comms, and hierarchy. Supply lines vanished. Military nodes blinked off. Human soldiers moved through their capital undetected, not because they used cloaking, but because no one knew what they looked like anymore. They wore Vardrasi uniforms scavenged from battlefields, helmets from their own fallen, breathing gear painted in enemy colors. They became part of the environment. You didn't realize they'd passed through until a reactor failed, or a command node didn't answer, or someone found a knife buried in a desk with a simple phrase scratched into its handle. We remember. The final push came on day 3. Human Command issued a planet-wide override signal, hijacking every Vardrasi broadcast. Every screen, every device, every neural link, even the ones buried beneath security firewalls. The image that appeared wasn't a threat, it was a face. Commander Hawthorne. He stared into the feed, calm, sharp-eyed, silent. Then he spoke. "You had time. You had choices. Now you have us." He tapped a console. The feed fractured, not with static, but with simultaneous live footage. Cities falling, ships collapsing in dry dock, artificial moons breaking apart from within, and scattered through it all, the same men who'd started this return. Rourke, Torres, Graves, Resnick. They weren't leading armies, just doing what they always did. Quiet, brutal, precise things. When the Alliance fleet entered orbit, it found the planet's defense grid down. No resistance. Vardrasi ships sat idle or cracked open. Ground signals begged for surrender, not terms. They pleaded for protection. From humanity. But humans didn't raise Varknol. They didn't annihilate or enslave or rewrite. They left a warning, not a monument, not a scorched emblem. They built a small black obelisk in the center of the Vardrasi's Grand Palace. A smooth, silent thing, with no energy source, no apparent interface. Just a shallow ring of words burned into the floor around it. Let this stand where war once ruled. Let silence speak now. Then the humans departed. Some returned to Terra Black. Others vanished into deep space, ignoring the Alliance's offers of medals, rank, or tribute. The vault wasn't sealed this time. It was left open, unchained. Some say that means humanity could rise again at any time. Others say they never truly returned, that we only saw a fragment of what they were. But everyone agreed on one thing. The war was over not because the Vardrasi surrendered, but because humanity stopped moving. No species wanted to test what would happen if they didn't. The Alliance rebuilt. Treaties were formed. Lost sectors reclaimed. But always, always, those who led remembered. Victory hadn't come from superior numbers or brighter minds or longer reach. It came from a locked world we were too scared to revisit, from a species that had no gods but had become myth, from those who were out of time, out of hope, so we unleashed the human race.